Hi everyone, I'm Annick and I'm the founder of Immaculate Vegan. Today I'm delighted to be interviewing Orsola de Castro, the founder of Fashion Revolution Week, which this year starts on the 19th of April. Fashion Revolution Week is all about creating a better fashion industry, which is something that we massively support at Immaculate Vegan. So I'm going to be asking Orsola to tell us more about what Fashion Revolution Week is, what are its goals, and how can we all get involved in driving the change that, unfortunately, the fashion industry still very much needs. So welcome, Orsola. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we are going to talk obviously quite a lot about Fashion Revolution Week and what the campaign is going to be this year and how everyone can get involved. But before we go into that, can we just talk a little bit about you? So can you tell me a bit about, well, how would you describe what it is that you do now? And I guess how did you get to the point where you are?
Well, God, that's
yeah,
very hard.
That might be quite a lot. You can give us a potted summary, I guess.
Okay, so what I do now is different to what I did when I started out.
Yeah.
And I'm now very much a fully fledged campaigner.
Yeah.
And I think more of a fashion thinker at this point in time than a fashion maker, although I really did start as a maker.
Yeah.
So my own personal development started with having a brand, an upcycling brand, tiny but successful in its own right, in its period. Then I was the co-founder and co-curator of Aesthetica at London Fashion Week, which was the British Fashion Council Sustainable Area Initiative, which ran between 2006 and 2014. And then Fashion Revolution came in 2013 with Carrie and the team.
Yeah.
And now I've just published my first book, which is called Loved Clothes Last.
Yes,
and
we want to talk about.
So I'm making this transition towards maybe perhaps being an author. I never know, which would have been the very beginning of everything, because that's what I wanted to do when I was 15.
Oh, so, really? Wow.
Could be. Could be. It might be full circular for me, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, that's very exciting. So what was it that kind of got you to where you are now then? I guess what kind of excited you about fashion in the first place, and then particularly about making the changes to the fashion industry that you've since been sort of instrumental in helping to drive?
Well, I mean, I can talk about clothes until the cows come home, and that's the short answer is I've got a real passion for clothes. I always have. I don't remember a minute in which they weren't highly important in my life. All of my memories are around the clothes I wore, way more than the things I did, or the clothes that other people wore more than what they said somehow. And my brand was about taking things that are discarded by others, fabrics, materials, clothes, and bringing it back into life via a creative process. So really my start is 100% creative, for the love of clothes and for the love of small things, because upcycling often brings you to collect lots of bits of fabric. And then, of course, my activism came because I was an insider in this industry, because I saw the industry shift, say, from Europe to China and further into the other producing countries. And it was witnessing the shame that somehow made me want to find the pride. And so my motivation, although from a creative point of view, nevertheless managed to somehow understand that there's a lot that can be done in a creative industry with creativity. And the fashion revolution is very much about celebrating the industry. It comes from a point of love. And for me, that was the only way that I could work in fashion, was if I could antagonize the industry at the same time as becoming a part of it, because I just had so much that I wanted to question. And so I did.
Yeah, that's amazing. And obviously you've formed Fashion Revolution Week, which has been going for quite a while now. Can you tell us a bit about what fashion, for people that don't know, and hopefully there aren't many, but what is Fashion Revolution Week? What are you trying to do? And also, why did you found it? What was the kind of...
Well, we didn't found the week, we found the movement. So we founded Fashion Revolution, which is a movement that works all year long. We have a presence in over 90 countries globally, And in fact, I would say we are our country coordinators. The thing that's our main point of difference with any other campaign, that we have this massive network of individuals that are all in one way or another from the fashion industry or involved in it somehow. And with a different global perspective. So that's the strength of the movement.
Yeah.
Fashion Revolution Week used to be Fashion Revolution Day. And the first, Fashion Revolution Day, say, let's go back to Fashion Revolution Day 2014, which was our first.
Yeah.
And the point for us was always to somehow ask really, really simple questions that were very difficult to answer. So obviously the 24th of April coincides with the fall of the Rana Plaza, the disaster at the Rana Plaza. That's our raison d'être to a certain extent.
And was that the trigger for Fashion Revolution, or had you already been thinking about doing something?
No. That was definitely the trigger. That we had been, obviously I'd been involved in this space already for, a good 10 years before that.
Yeah.
So the concept was that obviously when Rana Plaza collapsed, it was very much the worst I told you so ever, and it was the tipping point for many of us. But Fashion Revolution was born to question, and above all, to expose the lack of transparency that made Rana Plaza not only possible, but so difficult to overcome. Yeah. And, we started with a really simple question, which is, who made my clothes?
Yeah.
Which we knew perfectly well that the majority of the brands we were going to ask it to were just not going to be able to answer, because at that point in 2013, 2014, transparency, believe it or not, was even worse than now.
Yeah, I believe that.
So that was very much the thing. Fashion Revolution, it's, I guess, as well as the pro-fashion protest, this sense of belonging in the industry, being part in and part out. But the other strong message that we sort of always sent out was accuracy. We're not a sensationalistic campaign. We're not the best of the worst of. We try to speak with measure. We also talk about measure. We talk about adequacy instead of excess, or prosperity instead of growth. So it was very important for us that our message was measured, but that our visuals were different. So the kind of the communication exercise, in that sense, the branding exercise, was to look amazing and tell the truth.
Yeah. And how did that truth go down at the time? So yeah, this was 2014, so it wasn't that long ago. But like you say, things were, if we think things are bad now, they were even worse then. How did your message of transparency and who made my clothes go down, particularly with the larger retailers that I guess you were particularly speaking to?
I would say they totally ignored us, the retailers, to begin with, but obviously people didn't, and so retailers quickly realized that they couldn't ignore us much longer.
Yeah.
I do actually believe that in terms of the word transparency, we were very much one of the organizations that sort of, made the word such as transparency and supply chain the type of conversation you can have in a supermarket. You certainly couldn't before us, not to this extent.
Yeah.
So undoubtedly the campaign really did start something. We were in many ways the first of a kind. We were one of the first campaign, if not the first. I've never double checked, but all of our branding was available for free for everyone to download. So we looked really strong just at the very beginning of our campaigning.
Yeah.
So, people did take us seriously. And I think, while, for instance, maybe with my own brand, I was about 25 years too early.
Yeah, very early.
Exactly at the right time, exactly at the right time. And that was proved by the millions of people, the millions of uses of our hashtag.
Yeah.
And, how much it did change preconceptions, and how it really facilitated for brands to become more involved and even competitive with each other around transparency.
Yeah, it's become a point of difference now, hasn't it? When actually so much else is quite homogenized. I think it's something for brands to be proud of. And
well, that I can tell you, because I remember very, very clearly that on the first day that we came out, so first year, 2014,
Yeah.
we were all at the team of Fashion Revolution at the time, which was really teeny team compared to now. We were all at fair trade offices. They'd lend us the space.
Yeah.
And I remember discussing between us, imagine if brands started to compete with each other on who's the most transparent. And I mean, it felt like, nah,
Yeah.
this could never, and we're seeing it.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say that Fashion Revolution was at the right time, because I think there had been a shift and there had been a change. Obviously, we know that for the mainstream, neither the shift nor the change is speedy or consistent enough. Yeah. But we were there at the beginning of that change, and it certainly, served us a good purpose.
Yeah. And so, well, now you're kind of 8 years down the line. How has that changed then? How has it changed year on year? Have you sort of seen the kind of, I guess, changes in terms of the reception of your messaging, bigger brands kind of getting on board? Citizens obviously have been really getting on board, as we've seen with the hashtag and all kinds of other things. But yeah, how would you describe that sort of journey for the last 8 years then?
That obviously nothing's changed enough, because otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of Fashion Revolution is, in a way, to cancel itself out of existence.
Yeah.
We're very, very committed to that, believe it or not. It is in our, the ultimate goal for us is to not exist, which potentially not a great business planning, but, it serves.
But you want to achieve your goals then, yeah, if that does happen.
So the fact that we're still here tells you that not enough has changed. And I think we need to be a little bit more specific as to where change is occurring. So in terms of citizens' awareness, yes, people are infinitely more aware of these conversations and also of how they can take part. So they're looking for information on how to become an active part of the solution. Sometimes they find it, sometimes they don't. Some look better than others. In terms of brands, mainstream brands, nowhere near where they promised us we would be by now. Because don't forget that at Fashion Revolution, this has put me in a position to attend several, global conferences of one type or another. And I cannot tell you the promises I've had. And yet I have never seen a brand actually putting their hand up and saying, we did that wrong. Yeah. And, let's move on. So it is a really vain space when we're looking at mainstream brands. They don't tell the truth, they greenwash, they don't admit to making mistakes. None's come up with saying, oh my God, sorry, 200, 300 odd years of human and natural exploitation, sorry. It's really, really kind of deaf ears and a deaf system. Obviously, some are improving and changing course. But where I have really seen a difference, and really the type of difference that we should all be, jumping up and down with joy, is in the emerging brands on a global scale.
Yeah.
So my other job is that of mentoring. I lecture very much at Central St. Martin's and many other universities in the world. And that's why the change is just mind-boggling. And as I said, it's not the kind of change that is, we are the kids at CSM or UAL in London or, FIT in New York or Parsons. No. This is universal. And I am, in fact, some of the best innovation. I'm actually seeing it happen in places you wouldn't necessarily think of that innovation, like incredible upcycling in India, right next to the factories. Yeah. And these were things that this is really where the change lies in the people that are building their future now. I wish we could give them more visibility.
Yeah, so I think, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because, we sort of see the same, right? Because we're dealing with sustainable and vegan brands who are trying their very best because they passionately believe in these things, to have, the best and fairest ethical supply chains, to be doing the best manufacturing using closed loop technology, solar powered factories, amazing new innovative materials that are all plant-based, brilliant packaging. They're really trying hard to think about every element of their supply chain, but they're obviously very small brands. And I think, the danger, I think, for someone like me is that you can become, it's a bit of an echo chamber. So I sort of see this and think, great, there's real progress being made. On the other hand, then you look at the stats about how much actually even a lot of fast fashion brands have massively grown during the pandemic. You think, oh my God, it feels like we're still just a drop in the ocean. Like, how do you feel about that? Do you feel optimistic? Do you think those emerging brands are going to take over the incumbents, and that those incumbents will just die, or will they change? Will they be driven to change just because citizens demand that they do?
I hope so, Annick, very much so. And I really share your echo chamber situation. I have to tell you that my echo chamber, though, has grown spectacularly. And if I was concerned of echo chambers, now I'm thinking, well, I mean, this echo chamber, my echo chamber is speaking to, plenty of people. And I guess in many ways, I've just recently seen my book slightly getting out of my bubble and my echo chambers in order to go on to somebody else's. But the truth is that we do need to keep lobbying. And there are different ways of lobbying. And, for me, my position remains the same. And it is that, it is unattainable to think that something like 40 or 50 brands control over 95% of the market. And, my entire life is dedicated actually more to the young designers and emerging designers than it ever was to fashion revolution in many ways, because it predates it and it will postpone, it will follow. And, the truth is that what is beginning to happen is that fashion is fantastically and brilliantly cyclical. So, it always reinvents itself. In the 80s, you want to redo the 60s. In the 90s, we redid the 70s in such a way that the 70s, it was almost almost more authentic than the real thing we did. So there is going to be a gigantic backlash against this invasive species, which is mainstream fashion. Yeah. And unless they start becoming responsible for their invasion. And so for me, there's two ways. When brands, and I really don't talk about fast fashion, because there is a level of luxury, premium mainstream luxury, which is absolutely culpable in very similar ways, slightly different crimes, but nevertheless. Yeah. And the truth is that, so I want to see this space-giving exercises so that they really do make visibility for the smaller brands for whom innovating is much easier, change is much easier. I want them to see full responsibilities according to who they are and where they are. But I mean, if they're taking up space in the high street, then you've got to give me repairs. I feel that it is the brand's responsibility to, especially those brands that make very, very, very cheap clothing, therefore not paying people and not paying nature sufficiently. They ought to have very cheap and very affordable mending stations in their stores. And, luxury's obligation is to be 100% traceable. Luxury is pedigree. Without 100% traceability, who's to tell? It's the same as a fake, as far as I am concerned.
Yeah.
So, these are the conversations that I want to see, because they will create the type of scrutiny in citizens and their customers that will make it much more enticing to look for alternatives. Yeah. But, the fundamental is somehow to encourage all citizens and customers to sort of also develop different criteria when they buy. So it's not just about buying for size, but also the size that fits your principle. It's spending as much time looking at the supply chain as it would be comparing the length of a pair of trousers, instead of comparing, where that zipper is, or are they, high waist or low waist, or, flare or is back in fashion. Yeah. Just you check how much those workers were made as well, because it's a new exercise, it's a new way of buying. And I'm not saying it's simple. I mean, I would be dead as a dodo, for instance, but even someone like me, who is basically techno granny of the worst kind, can actually Google and find out as much as possible about brands. So if I can do it, I promise you anybody else can. Yeah. But it is investing time in a different way.
And I guess it's just becoming a habit, isn't it? It's just doing that as as just something that you do. And then you find brands that you find out that actually are great and are doing really good things. And you can hopefully get behind those brands and keep supporting them.
Exactly. And that relationship, having been a brand, is incredibly important.
Yeah.
The relationship with your customers, the ones that you know, the ones that become known to you, the ones that stay with you, is fundamental for the brand and for the customer.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of being a smaller brand, that you really can listen to what your customers are saying, you can design accordingly. And it is a much healthier relationship than that of brand and aspirer, which is the relationship we have in place now.
Yeah, and I think as a customer, it's just lovely to be able to see a brand sort of be nurtured and grow as a result of that, and get better and be able to do more with, and try and be more sustainable.
And the concept of replicating thousands rather than upscaling 4 means inevitably also their prices will become more competitive, and sharing supply chain will strengthen the workers, the people that work on those supply chains. So ultimately, at the end of the day, replication instead of upscaling is really where we need to be, and a lot more sharing of resources. Again, fashion's been profoundly stingy for so long on so many things.
Yeah. Well, that takes us very nicely, I think, onto Fashion Revolution Week for this year. So you've talked about how, or rather from as a group, you've talked about how your focus this year is going to be about the interconnectedness of human rights and also the rights of nature, which I think that sounds right up our street. Can you tell me a bit more about what that means, and how is that different to kind of what you focused on before? Is that a subtle shift?
It's not, actually. I have to be honest. We did this first theme, I think it was in 2017 or 2018. And it was really, for us, it's always been people and nature. There's no separation between the two. Yeah. You cannot be advocating for one without advocating for the other. And to be honest, in 2018, we were asked several times, what does that actually mean? Yeah. And I remember thinking, gosh, how else am I going to explain this? Right? Isn't it not just bloody obvious? But of course it wasn't. It is in 2021. So this goes to show that sometimes what is considered a complicated conversation, when a whole bunch of people start reading about it, it becomes an easy conversation, or an urgent conversation, or an inevitable conversation, but it's no longer that complicated, is it? And now we do know that people depend on nature, and nature depends on people, or nature is, affected massively by people. Hence the intersection between the two. The theme for this year is the title for this year is Rights, Relationship, and Revolution. Mm-hmm. And I guess for those who don't understand, my only way of explaining it is that because we're not treating each other as equals, we are not equally invested in the environment that we all share. The two examples that I can bring that might resonate for those who are listening to this and are not quite clear is, so if you are, imagine, a mother of young children, single parent maybe, or just a normal family of restricted income, and you're really struggling to bring food to your table, shopping plastic free is really not going to be your priority. It's up to the supermarket to ensure that you have a plastic free product to purchase. And equally, if you are a garment worker and you fear for your life if you speak up, how can you potentially talk about environmental indignities or abuses that you are seeing and witnessing in your place of work? So, without equity and equality, some of us can do something, but the majority of us are not incentivized nor helped to do it. And that's the intersection. That is the responsibility that falls on everyone to ensure that we are all equally involved in this conversation of conservation. And at Fashion Revolution, our one of the top of our theory of change is that we believe in a fashion industry that values, that restores and conserves the environment, and that values people over profit and growth.
Mm.
That's who we are. That's Fashion Revolution. And, you know, if you read our manifesto, I guess everything I'm trying to say now will be even more articulated in that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is completely true as well, in terms of these are things are related, they're completely interrelated already, right? So, you know, even if you look at things like, you know, traditional leather tanning, which is awful for the environment, but it's also awful for the people that have to, you know, work with all those chemicals as well. You know, they have, you know, they suffer from awful diseases, they tend to have, you know, they die really young. So all these kind of areas where you think things are really bad for the planet, they're often really awful for the people working in those conditions, and equally vice versa.
Absolutely.
People are being exploited, so is nature. Exploitation kind of tends to be all encompassing.
Absolutely. I mean, industrialization has brought an onslaught on nature and on humans alike. Yeah. And, you know, the reality is that this message is now, unfortunately, has been, you know, delayed by skeptics for, you know, a few decades. And the urgency is now, you know, plain to see for all.
Yes, I think it's now hitting people in a way that maybe it hadn't so directly, or it wasn't necessarily on their doorstep.
Yeah,
quite far away. And yeah, now I guess all that sort of, all those ills are coming to bear fruit, unfortunately. But, you know, hopefully, again, I guess you know, the good message is that, you know, we can all do things. So what is your message for Fashion Revolution to everyone, whether it's, you know, what do you want retailers to do? What do you want brands to do? What do you want citizens to do? What do you want governments to do? How, you know, what is your kind of goal and message?
Okay, so that's going to be a really long question for a podcast.
Right, they're all a little bit different.
I recommend people to go and look at our resources, our Get Involved pack, because it's very clear what we're asking. Yeah. And as you say, it's different what we ask a customer or a citizen to what we're asking a brand, or, you know, people who participate in this conversation. But I mean, ultimately, I think what we're asking everybody is time. Yeah. You know, time to shop differently, time to really evaluate your supply chain, time to make those changes quickly, the time that we haven't got versus the time that we do have. And, you know, the truth is that, again, these are too complex. I'm saying complex, I'm not saying difficult, too complex issues to generalize. And each and every one of us will have a different responsibility and a different, somehow, journey of action. So it is important that, you know, in whichever sector of society you are, you make your pledge, you make your commitment clear over what you want to do, whether you're a, you know, clothes wearer, 100% of the population,
yeah,
or, you know, or wherever you work, there will be something that can be done. Yeah. Obviously, Fashion Revolution Week is really for the noise, for the mess, for the brands, for the visibility. So, you know, we may ask a lot during Fashion Revolution Week, but the reality is that as a movement, we preach urgent, but we also preach this isn't a diet. You know, this isn't something that you're going to do boom for 1 week and have things resolved. This is a lifetime of commitment and changing habits that will eventually, hopefully, result in a better planet, in a better life for us all. But it's not a quick fix, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it sounds. So I totally appreciate that. Actually, yeah, for those different groups, it is maybe more. There's sort of more nuances around that, and, you know, luckily on your website you do provide loads of amazing resources around that, which we'll also be sharing. But for citizens, I guess, I mean, it sounds like actually your message is relatively simple. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying, yes, it takes a bit of time, but actually the process is really, you know, becoming informed and asking questions where you don't find information. And that isn't a difficult or particularly complex things to do. It just takes a little bit of thought and investment, I guess, in the time to do.
But that's potentially because, obviously, I mean, the real onus to make changes on brands and governments. I mean, you know, this industry needs to be regulated, just as food is, as pharmaceuticals are, as beauty is. And, you know, the onus to make changes is on brand. Again, I go back to that example, you know, fast fashion brands making really, really cheap clothes. You've got to bloody make cheap repairs, guys. You know, otherwise it's just, you know, it is not sustainable. So we're very clear where the onus lies. when it comes to the real shifts, the real responsibility. And that's why, obviously, that's why we scream the loudest when it comes to the brands and governments. And, you know, we believe that citizens is only up to a point that what they can do, but we know that brands listen to citizens and their customers hugely. So again, it's one of these, you know, my right arm doesn't really work without my left arm. You know, that there's connection between my cells. There should be more connections between, you know, this supply chain, which was designed especially, you know, to be as opaque as it possibly can. So we need to connect an awful lot of dots, and then act in unison.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. I think there's lots of good info there for hopefully people to go and have a look at research, and, you know, do what you can. Can we also talk about your book? So you're also a very passionate advocate for looking after what we already have, and the whole sort of, you know, the concepts of care and repair, I guess. There's your book, beautiful. So Loved Clothes Last. Orsola, when did the book publish, and you know, what's the reception been so far?
Okay, so it published on the 11th of February in the UK, and on the 11th of March translated into Italian. And I've never written a book before, so I really have no measure of comparison as to whether the book is doing well or failing, you know, dramatically and spectacularly. Zero idea.
Yeah.
What I know is that it's doing better than what I had imagined, in the sense that people are more vocal about the book than what I had imagined they would be. I imagined people would buy the book, and then, I mean, you know, when I read a book, I don't necessarily connect with the author, if you see what I mean. I just read the book. And on the other hand, I'm having some insanely brilliant conversations with people all over the world about my book. And it's incredibly moving, and it's incredibly exciting. And I never ever thought that that it could feel so warm, and that I could feel so understood. You know, don't forget that I come from 20 years of fighting against my own system, you know, against the system that I'm in. You know, fighting the fashion industry, arguing with people, trying to convince people, and, you know, and I'm not a very logical human myself. You know, I'm a pretty creative, obviously I'm articulate and eloquent, but it's not been the easiest thing for 20 years swimming against the current. And now I've got this kind of, you know, it's like I'm being pushed by a current of people that are agreeing with me, and the majority of them are really young. I'm seeing, you know, my followers and the people I'm talking with, and I try to reply to as many. I'm also very, very, very curious by nature, so I love conversations. But I'm really speaking with people on Instagram and several other social media where they're reaching out. They're very young, and just
really exciting. So your message is really resonating with them.
It's resonated, and it's resonated on a global scale. I mean, you know, the book has been, as far as I'm concerned, I don't even know how they've gotten a hold of it, but the book is being widely read in India. I'm having conversations with people in India, in Australia, where it hasn't launched. It's meant to be launching in April. And, you know, I've been on, I've just seen a real interest, and in a lovely way. I mean, people are happy with, you know, they're excited with my slightly weird mending advice, because I'm not a particularly good mender, but obviously I love mending. So it's like I'm a lazy mender. So there's loads of, you know, ways of getting, you know, still doing it, but getting out of it at the same time. But obviously what I'm most proud of is that the majority of people are telling me that it's changed their perspective. And I've had that from really important fashion journalists to, you know, people that I've never met before in my life, and who just contacted me on Instagram to let me know. And that's obviously the wording, the writing, and the thinking. So it really couldn't have been, better.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And obviously it's called, you know, Love Clothes Last, but actually it's not just about mending and caring for your clothes, is it? Can you tell us more about actually what is it about? What's the kind of core messages? Or
well, I have to tell you the whole story, because I was contacted by my agent on Instagram on a DM. I never practically, I mean, I think I realized what DMs were because I found her, and she wrote to me saying that she wanted to commission a how-to book on mending. And of course, the usual honest, you know, probably unthinking me, I replied, oh, there's loads of brilliant books on mending. And I'm a really bad mender. So no, sorry, I don't think that I can do you a how to mend, but I could jolly well do you a why to mend. And that's my book. So my book gives you context and makes you realize why it is so important that we think about longevity. I mean, the whole world tells you to throw. So the only real antidote is to keep. People talk about circularity, same as they were talking about sustainability, without really the context of what it is. And circularity is very difficult for citizens because it does imply either a chemical or mechanical process. But longevity is the story of our life. Aren't we all obsessed with our own longevity? Why not be as obsessed with the longevity of the objects that we surround ourselves with? So that's the book. And I believe that unless you really know what you're fighting for and why, you're not going to be able to find your own way of doing so consistently. So again, I always say, this is not juicing. This is, your life ahead of you. And so how can those changes be as natural to you as actually walking? It's called a journey. So let's make it as easy as walking. And if you look at it that way, every morning when you enter your wardrobe or start fiddling with your clothes, you've got solutions there. So it's just a question of having those minutes to think a little bit. Think before you wear.
Yeah.
And then that's your starting point. And I'm literally getting messages from people saying, you know what, I'm really bad at mending, and that's why I never wanted to mend. But after knowing that you're really bad at mending and that you've got clothes that I want to mend, I saw so many people, men and women, picking up a needle. There's a guy on Instagram that is reenacting the book for a whole month. So he's trying everything, and he's doing a bit at the end, which is month by month. So
yeah,
very.
That must be really rewarding to see. And of course, if you are a rubbish mender, and I'm a rubbish mender as well, there are people that can do that mending for you as well, right? There are loads of very, very skilled people out there. And actually,
and it provides
starting now.
Absolutely, it provides dignified work.
Yeah.
And each piece of clothing that is mended is new. So, we need to also reconsider this rush of buying something new and cheap, and really understand, because it's a different rush for this generation, but there's an equal rush in having things prepared.
Yeah, I think it totally is. I mean, I recently took a bunch of my mum's clothes. My mum's 80. And she, she's got these beautiful, exquisitely made, high quality clothes that she bought, 40 years ago or more. And I took those to a local mender in her town, who's also amazing. And they just turned into new clothes for me, essentially. And it was just it's so exciting to have that. And I know the material is really amazing as well. So it's a new wardrobe for very, very little money. The money has gone to somebody that really deserves it as well. It was paid well for it. And no new results.
But also, the truth is that this is real choice. When brands say, but consumer demand, we are providing choice. In my opinion, let's even put modest opinion if we want, but millions and millions of brands of exactly the same thing from Milan to Mumbai, that is not choice. That's an imposition. Choice is deciding that you're going to have your clothes mended, repaired, or shed, or swapped, or that's what choice.
It's a good way to take back power, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about vegan fashion? So obviously, we're a vegan fashion platform. We are, place an equal focus on sustainability as well, which isn't always the case with vegan fashion.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about the vegan fashion market and, the brands, the products, the materials? Do you have any sort of view on those and how they've changed maybe?
I'm not a vegan myself. And so, and animal welfare has never been my starting point.
Yeah.
So of course I have the welfare of all living ecosystem. And as you quite rightly say, a vegan product is potentially guaranteeing a safer life for a certain type of animal, but not necessarily for another. Although we do know 100%, for instance, in the case of leather, that there is no way that the leather impact could, the impact of leather on the planet is fundamentally disastrous, and nothing could come close to it. So the argument that plastic, which is what vegan products are primarily made of, is better. It has now been pretty much agreed upon. The real issue for me is, I could tell you the same about upcycling fashion, organic fashion, you know, it's the cocktail that matters. I understand that somebody vegan would only want to wear vegan clothes, but I would counsel against that, because anything that is done in excess risks taking away any form of balance. So, as you mentioned before about your brands, I think what is interesting of any brand is to really understand what is it that they are doing throughout their supply chain. And again, for me, it's not necessarily the concept of vegan. I would say the same to a brand that is focusing entirely on natural materials from, you know, of whichever kind. I am worried at the sectarianism that we have at the minute, which means that everybody is 100% this. So I'm 100% here. Well, this is the one. I mean, I recently was sent an article to make a comment on, and it said, "Is renting clothes going to save the world?" This is an attitude that has always and will continue to freak me out. And so for me, vegan, organic, upcycling, irrelevant. What matters is looking for efficiency, looking for balance, and looking for common sense. And I am absolutely sure that the vegans of the future are looking at all of this criteria more than, say, the vegans that we used to see at the time of Estetica, which often were quite proudly saying we're vegan leather, but we have no idea who's making our bags. And they're made God knows where under no scrutiny.
Yeah.
So that is what's important. I do believe that veganism has been absolutely fundamental as a movement, though, in showcasing that when people get together of all ages to make changes, things can grow 400% in a year. And I'm a huge admirer of the movement in itself and the awareness that it's raised. And so, again, as with all of these movements, ourselves included, I look at the core, I look at the spontaneity and the, you know, the what they do, and that will be radically different from brand to brand.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, it sounds like what you're saying, it's not really about the label, whether that's a vegan label or organic label, whatever it is. It's actually, you know, it goes back to, again, you know, you need to spend a little bit of time thinking about what's underneath the label, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, if I can give you an example, you know, a vegan brand that doesn't say provide inclusivity in size. I mean, I would be critical of any brand that doesn't provide or is looking to provide inclusivity in size. I know how difficult it is. Yeah. But my point is that the minute you start experimenting on one ethical supply chain, then you have to prepare yourself and open yourself for all sorts of other conversations to permeate, you know, your design DNA.
Yeah. Well, Orsola, you've been very, very generous in your time. I've got one final question for you, which is just, what are your goals and I guess hopes for the future, both fashion and fashion revolution? I mean, I think you kind of said, well, actually, you want fashion revolution not to have to exist anymore.
That's the goal of fashion revolution.
Yeah.
But there is still a 10-year vision before that happens at the very least.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's not going to be fixed in a couple of years' time. So yeah, what are your hopes and goals for fashion?
So I'm not a very goaly person. I am very much a visionary and I'm very patient. So I'm waiting for things to happen. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I don't have a single goal. I don't have, you know, anything of the sort. And I wish for all of us that we were all to take this moment in history very seriously, and each other at this point in history very seriously.
That sounds like a good hope and a vision to have. Thank you so much, Orsola. Thank you for your time, and best of luck with Fashion Revolution Week as well. I hope it goes really, really well.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I very much look forward to seeing you and your brands taking part in Fashion Revolution Week. So thank you.
Thank you so much.